Brain ungloss. Well, that was something. Lycius spoke as she sat down and watched the figures of the two nobles enter the castle. She then turned to Arthur and looked at him with a bit of worry. She was keenly aware that nobles do not take things lying down and they'll retaliate for the disrespect he displayed. It certainly was something, but moving on. How can we be moving on? Even if Arthur is your knight, he can't get away with disrespecting the nobles like that. Lycius interrupted Renner, and the princess could not help but roll her eyes in a bit of annoyance. Lycius, this is quite all right. This actually plays well into my plans. What Arthur did was prove to the nobles that they cannot control me and establish that I am a threat. Combine that with my meeting with your father. My political power is rising and thus means my voice in the noble court will be louder. This means we are one step closer abolishing slavery. Renner explained. Of course she did not plan for her abrupt meeting with the nobles today, nor did she expect Arthur to do as he did. However, it was easy for her to see how this would benefit her in the long run. Although she does hope no assassination attempts come her way, once Barbaro realizes she might be a threat to his claim to the throne, he might hire assassins to eliminate her. That makes sense, I suppose, and now that you mention it, you did try to have slavery abolished a few months ago. Lycius responded. As stated before, Renner never actually intended to have slavery abolished. She simply wished to test her power in the noble court. Once her power and influence grow big enough, she plans to test it once again. Plus, since she plans to be queen, the favor she has on the peasants will be much more important now. Now then, let us move on from that. This meeting is to discuss what to do with 8 fingers. For the moment I cannot think of a way to get rid of 8 without great backlash, so do you have any ideas? Renner asked. Of course that was untrue. She had a good idea what to do with 8 fingers, however since she's working with someone like Lycius who's very moral and upstanding, Renner needs to be careful with how she says things. I don't see why we need to discuss this. 8 fingers is a dangerous organization that needs to be eliminated. The people of the kingdom will never know peace if we don't, and kingdom will never prosperity with such a parasitic organization within its borders. She offered her thoughts of the matter. Lycius understood quite clearly that should they eliminate 8 fingers, the power vacuum they leave behind would be filled by another, but she believes they can easily prevent that by taking care of said organization early on. Having heard Lycius's idea, Renner took note that the maid that had silently stood a ways away from them had her interest piqued. However, that was all Renner was willing to let her hear before clapping her hand and commanding her to leave, and the maid did so without complaint. After such actions, she turned to Arthur and signaled him to speak. He also let out his demon lord's hockey, targeting anyone aside the 3 of them, ensuring that no one else was listening. I have a simple idea. Rather than get rid of 8 fingers and have to deal with whatever organization comes after it, why not transform it to work to benefit the kingdom instead? What do you mean? Lycius was quick to question. She did not like the direction this seemed to be headed, and she hoped that a nice person like Arthur was not about to suggest that they let 8 fingers continue operating. For the most part, people will do immoral things regardless of how much you may want they don't. Drugs, prostitution, gambling, human trafficking and so on are all things we can agree are terrible. He received an affirmative nod from Lycius while Renner gave a nod that was less affirmative, almost as if she was saying that all that he said was debatable. No matter how successful a country can be, it never actually gets rid of those things. Unfortunately, that's just how people work. Where are you going with this? Lycius questioned, and Arthur continued. However, that doesn't mean we can't make those bad things good, control them so that they don't harm as many people as they would and make so the people affected don't suffer as much. He paused and let his words sink in. He leaned forward and took a sip of his drink before he continued. For instance, prostitution. Women who participate in it are usually poor and had no other option or were forced into it because of debt, but unfortunately they usually can't leave the life once they start, and they get fed drugs to keep them in, and no matter how much money they mail they can never pay off the debts I propose. Arthur explained. The idea was not as simple as he stated. The idea was that the country would control all the organized crimes and less than moral businesses. The drugs would be controlled and regulated by the country. How much of it is on the street and what type of people can buy or sell it, it would be the same with prostitution. The difference is that there would be contracts that ensure that no one is exploited or taken advantage of. Gambling would work similarly as well. Of course, they wouldn't be able to control all the crime, but it's better than creating a power vacuum that would invite a greater disaster. I see, so essentially we'd take over either fingers and minimize the damage it causes to the kingdom while still using it to gain profit, is that it? Yes, but I also have a few ideas too, but we'll discuss them another time. What do you think about all this, Lycius? Arthur asked, turning his head towards the blonde-haired adventurer. He knew that she might have a problem with his idea, however at the same time he knew that she was not stupid. She understood that no matter how much she may not want it to happen, crime will happen. Lycias closed her eyes in thought, contemplating the idea Arthur brought forward. His idea made a lot of sense, and she understood it clearly, but at the same time, she couldn't help but dislike it. It's fine, but no children should ever be involved. Of course, that was always a given. If we're all in agreement, then the matter is closed, although your idea will require quite the sum of money and I do not think 8 fingers money will be enough. You also said you have some ideas as well. No need to worry, Renner, I know a place. He gave her a wink as he said, he does remember Momonga finding some dragons that had a ton of treasure and gold plus subjugating a few dragons, and having them become his pet will be actually perfect. Alright, I will not ask questions about it. Renner said as much before taking a sip out of her now cold tea, and unfortunately, she could not call her maid back, so she had to drink it cold. Also, by the way, would I need to be an official knight of the kingdom to start my own knight order? Yes, that would be the case, although to be a knight of the kingdom, you'd need to have been born in the kingdom or have contributed significantly to the well-being of the kingdom. Currently you have 2 contributions, the Basilisk and the Undead event in Erantel, and since you have dealt with most of the members of 6 Arms, I'd say it will be a matter of time before you're officially knighted. Renner explained, and Arthur nodded to her words, although Arthur felt that there were enough people within the kingdom that would be worthy of his knight's order, but he'll have to do with what he's got. That's good, while I'm still waiting on Lycias to answer, there's someone I think would be a good addition. He's comparable to Gazef in terms of swordplay, so I'll be going to his hideout to recruit him tomorrow. Arthur explained. He would much rather have Gazef on his team, but the man is loyal to a fault and most likely would never betray the king, so Arthur is forced to look for someone else. Comparable to Gazef. Is it? Yes, it's Brain Ungloss. Evening. Brain Ungloss yawned deeply before letting out a powerful sneeze that caused him to shake his head as he did so. Somebody must be talking about me. He quipped as he lay down on his bed, his arms behind his head and his face staring at the dark cave ceiling he called home. The mercenary life was not pleasant, and he did not particularly enjoy it, but it did give him the type of freedom he wanted. One could say that being an adventurer would be much better and less criminally involved, however Brain sought to not be bound by anything and his sole purpose was to strengthen his martial arts skills, which he did successfully. Hey. Just you wait, Gazef. You'll see the peak of swordsmanship. He whispered to himself. Of course his meeting with Gazef would take a while to occur. Brain believed that with his new technique, the God Flash, no one within the kingdom could best him in technique. 3 years of effort and effort alone he reached the pinnacle of swordsmanship, and soon enough he will showcase to the whole continent. However, right now, he's content with relaxing and enjoying himself. After all, spending 4 years doing nothing but non-stop training while unhealthy, as such, he needed a year's worth of a break. He may seek to improve his skills and better himself as a martial artist, but that in no way means he had to kill himself, and besides he was confident that there were few who could match him in strength, as such he had time to relax. Turning on his side, Brain closed his eyes, feeling a great sense of calm. After completing the God Flash, he was more than content with himself and his dreams were feeling with nothing but his victory over Gazef. Most of the things talked about regarding 8 fingers will happen in the background. I wrote it here I didn't want to feel forced when all of a sudden they have control over 8 fingers. The next chapter will be Arthur vs Brain. There's gonna be a time skip in the future, but it's far away, so don't worry. Also expect heavy drama between Renner and Lycias. 15 comments, 0 vote. Some interactions. Renner and Lycias walked down a long yet wide hallway. Their destination was the sleeping chambers of the second prince, Xanac. Renner's room was actually quite far removed from the bedrooms of the other members of the royal family. This was done at her request. Lycias. She called to her friend, initiating the first spoken word between them this afternoon. Arthur had taken a carriage and went to recruit someone named Brain Ungloss. The trip of his was under the guise of eliminating the bandits that had been harassing merchants going to and from the capital. The adventurer responded, seemingly shocked by the sudden voice. She had been thinking too deeply about something entirely irrelevant. As such, she did not expect to be pulled from her fantasy. I've been finding myself a bit bored with my free time. Do you have any good books you'd recommend? Princess asked. The both of them were individuals who appreciated a good read, although their tastes were wildly different, with Lycias preferring more fast-paced action stories and Renner preferring more slow-paced mystery stories. However, despite this difference in tastes, Lycias always managed to recommend just the right book. Unfortunately not Princess. Although Arthur has some interesting stories he tells, he comes off as well-read, so he might have some good recommendations. I suppose that's true. Speaking of Arthur, what do you think of him? The princess asked with a slight squint of her eyes, paying careful attention to Lycias's answers. What do you mean? Lycius found the question to be strangely embarrassing, like she was being asked a more intimate question rather than just an innocent curious question. Her mind thinking that way mayhaps be telling more about her than anything else. I mean, what do you think of him as an individual, a person, a man? That last part of Renner's question caused the adventurer to hesitate in answering the question. I think he is a respectable person, very reliable. She answered but decided to end her sentence there. She has some personal thoughts about Arthur but she felt that it would be inappropriate to speak about them or at the very least she did not want to say too much and seemed like she was interested in him. I think that's quite a shallow description but I suppose it is apt, but I like how he doesn't respect the nobles and barely cares about etiquette. Aside from his handsome face the best part is that he can do whatever he wants but chooses not to and he's very intimidating and powerful when he wants to, which I think is a valuable quality that any man should have. She explained. Then does that mean you're interested in Arthur? Lycius asked, feeling a sense of anticipation for Renner's answer to her question. She unknowingly held her breath, hoping the answer would be something she wanted to hear. I suppose I am. She answered and saw the hidden disappointment in Lycius's face, a sight that brought a little joy in her heart. While she considered Lycius a friend to an extent, Renner was unwilling to have Lycius steal her night away from her. She would be the only woman who would be intimate with him, and she would make no exceptions for anyone. Renner was not entirely sure that Lycius had feelings for Arthur, just as she herself wasn't sure about her own. The look of disappointment on Lycius just now simply told her that the adventurer's interest in her knight was still in its infancy, however it was better to crush it before it fully developed. And I'm certain he's interested in me too. He's very obvious about it. She said and smiled. To Lycius it would seem like a normal smile of a maiden happy that her man of interest liked her back, but Renner smiled because it brought her joy to know that Lycius would now give up on any interest she has on Arthur. It was a smile of victory. Renner didn't know if she loved him or not, but she knew that she thought he was attractive and she coveted his power and wanted him to stay by her side as long as possible, and she was willing to go to any lengths to ensure that remains so. She by herself had no power, but with Arthur by her side, she could finally do the things she was never able to do. The very notion of aiming for the throne would far more difficult to accomplish without her knight, as such it's essential that she does not separate from him. Is that why he became so defensive yesterday when the nobles were talking about your marriage? Lycius asked curiously, her disappointment discarded as she began to feel some happiness for her friend. Her interest in Arthur was small as such, she didn't feel devastated by the idea. I believe so. She informed. Unfortunately, however, their conversation was cut short when they arrived at their destination. Minutes earlier. Your Highness, did you hear? Xanax sipped his tea after humming in response to the Marquis' question. There's rumor that the princess plans to tackle 8 Fingers. What? He spit out his tea out of sheer shock at the news he just heard. His reaction was very reasonable. 8 Fingers was a large organization spanning the whole country. To try and get rid of it would take a massive amount of resources the nobles would be unwilling to waste. Indeed, it's but a rumor, but I believe the reason Sir Arthur left this morning is related to her plans about that. Is she stupid? Xanax questioned rhetorically, but he quickly dismissed such a notion. Renner was far from that, yet he could not fathom why she would plan to make such a move. There must be something she's after. I don't believe so, Highness, but I believe this is a big risk that she's taking. What do you mean, Marquis? The princess recently rejected the idea of marriage when it was brought up by the king, and yesterday it seems that she had an altercation with Yarovana, who brought up the topic of marriage as well. Raven explained and watched as the gears turned in the prince's head. Xanax was not the smartest of people, but he was never dumb either, as such, he could see things if they were obvious. You don't mean she's... Exactly, my prince, she's aiming for the throne. He finished the sentence for the prince and Xanax could not help but gasp in shock. What he just heard was unheard of. No woman in the history of the kingdom has ever dared to do such a thing. She's planning to use her possible victory against A to gain support from not only the peasants but the nobles as well. If she succeeds, no one would be able to deny her claim. Raven finished. 8 Fingers has been akin to a disease that was impossible to cure. Any attempts at demolishing the organization has ended up in failure. It didn't help that there were plenty of nobles who seemed to support the organization from behind the scenes. Getting rid of such an organization would be a daunting task. Even if she does fail, the very fact that she will have tried will gain her respect that she may use to gain more favor from the nobles. Xanax could not help but be impressed. Although he also felt that she will be met with obstacles, the attempt will get her respect she can use, but at the same time she'll gain the ire of many other nobles. Indeed I be. Knock knock. A knock came in from behind the door to the room, forcing the two to turn their attention toward it. Nazzarick looked at the marquee before deciding to answer the knock. Enter. The doors opened, and Renner entered as Lycaeus had opened the door for her. Good afternoon, dear brother and Marquis Raven. Indeed, my sister, what brings you to my chambers? Renner feigned a hurt expression and placed her hand on her chest. How mean of you, brother. Can I not simply visit you just to see you? We are family after all. Nazzarick rolled his eyes at her and decided not to answer her question, although he did feel bad about the fact that it is true that they only ever talk face to face when one of them wants something. What kind of older brother was he? Fine, schedule a meeting sometime this week, we can talk in the garden. I was actually joking, brother, no nay. No, you are indeed right. What kind of older brother never speaks to his sister? Nazzarick stated. Barbro was a terrible older brother to the both of them, Nazzarick at least thought to be a better brother than him. Anyway, we came here because I need you to take me to the dungeon. Is this about the prisoners you brought in 2 days ago? Yes. She answered, and Nazzarick sighed, wondered if she wished to torture them for information. She never really said anything about who they were, but if he had to guess, they're probably related to Eight Fingers. All right. Prince Barbro felt a great sense of anger towards a number of people right now, however in an act of great self-control, unlike him, he remained poised and calm, at least on the outside he did. Your Highness, may I know why you called me here today? Margrave Yarovana asked as he sat on the couch, his head turned to look at the prince. As a member of the royalty faction, he felt like he was inside the enemy's den. Despite being a prince, Barbro was getting his backing from the nobility faction. I hear that yesterday you had an unpleasant encounter with that peasant knight that my sister keeps around. I suppose I did. He was rather quite brazen and disrespectful. The Margrave answered, although he could already tell where this was going, it was fairly obvious to anyone that Barbro had a sort of grudge against Arthur, and unlike the rest of the nobles he could not see the value the knight had. He quite indeed is, he doesn't seem to recognize the nobility or the royal family. We can't have a subordinate show so much insolence towards his betters now, can we? I suppose we cannot. Yarovana agreed. Despite Arthur being disrespectful towards him and Pespi, the Margrave planned to do nothing about it. If anything, he would have a slight talk with Arthur about it. The man was still young and probably did not understand politics very well. As such, the Margrave thought giving him advice on how to properly deal with nobles would help him in the long run. Yes, he felt a great anger after that incident. Yes, he felt the need to punish him and make him regret it. However, Yarovana is no fool. The yearly war with the Baharuth Empire is close. To antagonize Arthur would not be fruitful. Then what do you propose we do to deal with him? Yarovana sighed and took a glance at Marquis Bulup and gave him a disapproving look. If you're going to manipulate someone for your cause, at least make sure they know the value and importance of certain people. To the Margrave, this just proved that Barbro was unfit to rule this kingdom. I apologize, Your Highness, but I have very urgent matters to attend to. His Majesty had asked for my presence earlier today, so if you'll excuse me. The Margrave stood up and marched to the exit, not caring for whatever the prince might have to say. Slamming the door as he got out, he left a fuming prince inside. Bam! The prince slammed his hands onto his desk with enough force to split it in two. All of them are cowards. He shouted as he proceeded to kick the other half of the broken desk into the doors. The sudden crash startled a maid that was walking by, nearly causing her to slip and fall. How is the chapter? Anything out of place or seemed rushed? Please let me know. Stay cool, love y'all. 13 comments 0 vote. Encounter a swordsman. Nazzarick traversed the long narrow corridor of the dungeon along with 3 other individuals, his sister, the Marquis and Lycaeus. Unlike the other two and Nazzarick himself, Lycaeus did not need a change of clothes since she was already in her adventurer attire, although she did stick out amongst the individuals who wore plain brown potato sacks. So sister, are you willing to tell us who these prisoners you captured are? Indeed, Your Highness, I'm quite curious as well. Nazzarick spoke, and the Marquis concurred with his words. Both had suspicion that it was probably some low-ranking henchmen from Eight Fingers or perhaps some people higher in the chain of command. While the name of a few members of Eight Fingers are known, it does not help that despite knowing the names, Nazzarick and most other nobles have never really seen any of the high-ranking members. One exception to this would be Barbro, but even he only knows one high-ranking member. I'm afraid I can't do that, brother, you'll just have to wait and see. It was the same thing she had told him when she brought the prisoners the other day. Nazzarick could not help but have higher expectations about the whole thing. After a few moments of walking in silence, they arrived before 3 black doors that were guarded by 3 men. Nazzarick commanded them to open the doors, revealing each individual held within. So who are they? He asked. Looking at each cell, one could tell the difference between them, while the dark-skinned woman was chained to the wall like the other two. She looked less haggard and had practically no scratch on her, while the two men were battered and bruised. Brother, you're looking at two members of 6 arms, one former member who shall be my maid, courtesy of Arthur. Sister, are you implying that you've captured 3 members of the 8 Fingers Security Department? I am not implying anything, I am informing you. The prince could not help but remain silent as he heard his sister's words. He was stunned in silence. Gazef was the most powerful warrior in the kingdom, fully equipped, no man could stand up to him however, even he would be hard-pressed to take on 3 members of 6 arms. Did Blue Rose assist in their capture? Marquis Raven asked. Renner did not outright say it, but the implication seemed to be that Arthur did this by himself. No, they were on standby while Arthur subdued them, easily I might add. Hearing such words, Xanac was no longer shocked but rather envious. He cursed his damned luck for not being the one to have Arthur as his knight. On the other hand, Lachias could not help but tighten her fist. It was clear to her that she could not compare to Arthur in strength and that she needed to train harder. Wait, you said one of them was your maid? Raven asked in both confusion and shock. Indeed, Arthur is powerful enough to have his opponents submit to him. Speaking of that, release her, she'll be coming with us. Renner commanded. However, Xanac did not order the guard to heed her command. You don't expect us to let a criminal go, do you? Xanac asked as he raised his hand, stopping the guards from heeding Renner's commands. Yes, I do. If you wish Arthur to be officially knighted. Renner informed. She was aware that the nobles knew of Arthur's value to the kingdom. The war with the Baharuth Empire is a few months away and having Arthur and Gazef fight for the kingdom would be the ideal situation. Once this news of capturing 3 members of 6 arms spread, Arthur's value will skyrocket. This means that Renner doesn't have to put in a request for Arthur to be officially knighted. She simply has to bring up the idea, and the nobles will want to knight Arthur. She knows that Xanac should be able to understand this, meaning that she can threaten him with the idea of Arthur going to another kingdom. Fine, release her. He commanded. He couldn't help but sigh in defeat. Arthur may not be his knight or connected to him, however the idea of Arthur going to Baharuth or the slain theocracy was something he could not stomach. Both Baharuth and the theocracy had greater military might than the kingdom, as such Riestais needs someone to help them be on equal footing with both. Thank you, brother. She said with a wide smile, expressing gratitude toward her brother, and per Xanac's command the guards moved to release Edstrom from her chains. Renner could not help but feel elated as she watched what she wanted happen. She was certainly never letting Arthur leave her side. Oof. A man found himself slamming into the dirt ground with his chest as Brain had dodged his feeble attempt at an attack and tripped him. You guys are just weak, like come on, I'm not even trying here. Brain proudly said as he watched multiple of his mercenary friends laid out on the floor. Some of them were groaning in pain, clutching body parts that were hurt during this impromptu training session. It's not like you're the second strongest swordsman in the kingdom or anything, so sorry for not being a challenge. One of the men commented while rubbing his knee, and Brain could not help but smile. There was a great sense of accomplishment that filled him when he looked at the mercenaries before him. This convinced him that Gazef would no longer be a problem for him if they were to fight against each other again. Of course, beating down a bunch random mercenaries with hardly any sword skills was not that impressive. However, what was impressive was the fact there at least 50 of them, and Brain had bested them all at once and he barely felt tired. In fact, he felt he could take on 100 more, maybe even more than that. Well, how about we call it a day then? Seems like none of you will be a challenge anyway. Snap. With the quickness of lightning, Brain turned around, his sword grasped tightly as he turned to see who was approaching. None of his men had gone out for anything as such. There should be no one who knows of their hideout. The hideout in question was a cave on the side of a small hill that he and the mercenaries had dug deeper into, creating a large enough to house all of them. The cave was hidden behind a thicket of trees that obscured the cave from view. Fucking hell, I might be lost. A voice sounded from beyond the thicket of trees. Brain could hear the footsteps getting closer and closer. Brain signaled his men to remain on the ground, partly to not alert the guest that seemed to be headed towards them, and partly because it seemed that the person that was approaching was alone, meaning that Brain can fight him by himself if it's an enemy. It took a few minutes before the man was revealed to him. He walked through the trees cursing the fact he didn't have anything to protect his face from being scratched by branches. Finally a clearing. The blonde-haired knight stepped through and let out a sigh before starting to pull out some leaves and branches out his hair. You lost, friend? Brain asked, feeling that the man was not a threat. However, he wore armor, meaning he was a knight, so he was possibly sent here by someone or by some noble. What? No, I'm not. Arthur quickly denied such an accusation. He came here because he wanted to be here, and their fact the person he was looking for is before him is proof of that fact. He certainly didn't spend a good amount of time cursing the fact that in the anime it wasn't clear where Shaltir encountered Brain. Then might I ask what you are doing here? I'm looking for you, Brain ungloss. Brain squinted his eyes and took a stance indicating he was ready for battle. And why are you looking for me? To recruit you to be part of my Knight Order. Gazef is too loyal to the king, so he wouldn't agree, and so you're the next best thing. Those words caused Brain to relax a bit, however he did not like the implications that he was somehow second to Gazef. I'm insulted that you think I'm second best to Gazef, but regardless of that I'm not interested. What would it take for you to agree? Arthur asked. Obviously he knew that Brain would not just accept his proposal, but that didn't mean that Arthur had to just accept Brain's refusal, he just had to pull out the "I refuse your refusal." I'm not about to prance around wearing armor and doing some fat noble's bidding. You won't be working for a noble but instead working for me, and you don't gotta wear armor if you don't want to. Still not interested? Brain responded, and Arthur could only roll his eyes. It seemed that it was time to give up and look for someone else. Oh well, I suppose you aren't worth much considering that you're weaker than Gazef. See ya be. Weaker. Please, bring Gazef right here and I'll show how I'm better than him. Brain interrupted Arthur before he could finish his sentence. His words seemed a little sarcastic, but the seriousness in his eyes was clear as day, and Arthur could not help but smile. How about we duel? If you're truly stronger than Gazef, then beating someone he once taught and trained with should be an easy task, right? Brain scoffed at Arthur's proposal. The thought to refuse crossed his mind, however. If he actually was taught and trained by Gazef, then a duel may help him glean something about Gazef moves. Brain still remembers his battle with Gazef vividly, so the duel maybe help him be able to compare how similar Arthur's moves are to the old Gazef in his mind. Okay fine, however since this is duel, why don't add some things to spice it up? Brain suggested, and Arthur smiled. He was going to suggest that anyway. Okay, what are your conditions? He asked, seemingly more relaxed and uncaring, which Brain found odd considering he was the one that suggested the duel. Simple, if you lose to me, you owe me 100 gold coins. Okay, but if you lose to me, you get to agree to join my Knight Order and be my subordinate. Brain closed his eyes and thought about before letting out a sigh and deciding to agree. Fine. He agreed. Of course Arthur was aware that this duel of theirs is entirely illegitimate, and Brain had zero obligation to follow the demands should he lose. Arthur was not a firm believer of the philosophy of might makes right, however he understood that should you be stronger than someone else, that means you can enforce your demands on them regardless if they like it or not. As such, he was not worried about Brain not following the demands. Sorry y'all, I actually wanted to write the fight with Brain on this chapter, but I kinda got a block on how to structure it, so I had to hold off on writing it. Honestly, this whole chapter felt often a little unsatisfying. 12 comments, 0 vote. Cheat existence. The two men faced each other, Brain having taken a fighting stance and his hands on his blade focused and ready. Arthur, on the other hand, seemed relaxed. He didn't grab his sword but instead took a typical boxing stance. It was clear that he was not going to use the sword strapped to his waist. Brain could not help but feel insulted by the blonde knight's actions. It was clear he being underestimated and he did not like that very much, however he kept his mouth shut. Rather than complain, he simply resolved himself to end the match quickly and perhaps humiliate his foe. Begin. One of Brain's men, who had been tasked with being the one to start this duel, shouted, and not a second after the word left his mouth, Brain moved. FWOOP. The blade cut through the air at great speed, its sharp edge aimed directly at Arthur's shoulder. Brain sought to rid the knight of his right arm. The armor he was wearing meant nothing to Brain, as he was confident his blade could cleave through it without issue. Arthur simply turned his body to the side, letting the blade swing past him, and clenched his fist, preparing for his own attack. Unfortunately for Arthur, Brain was a high-level swordsman. The blue-haired mercenary halted his swing, then turned the sharp edge of from the ground towards Arthur and swung sideways. HMPH. Brain snorted, feeling already convinced of his fatal strike against the knight. Arthur simply bent backwards and dodged the attack, letting the blade once again swing past him. However, Brain once again halted his swing and turned the edge downward. Gripping with both arms, he swung down without a wind-up, which needed him to pull up and swing down. As a result, the swing had significantly less power. Arthur firmly placed his hand on the ground, supporting himself before using his leg to kick away his foe. Bam! Arthur's foot connected with Brain's abdomen, forcing him to stagger back and miss his swing and allowing for Arthur to stand up straight. After the exchange, the spectators let out a sound of amazement and whispers, with a few encouraging their boss to win this battle. You said you were better than Gazef, yet you can win against me, I'm not even using a sword. Don't get cocky you brat, that was just the first exchange. Brain responded, and Arthur simply shrugged his shoulders and shook his head. Brain could not help but tighten the grip on his sword. The knight before him was very skilled and may not be as easy as he thought. The man claimed to have been taught by Gazef yet doesn't use his sword, he clearly thinks Brain isn't good enough for him to draw his sword. Gritting his teeth, the blue-haired swordsman launched an attack. This time he went for a forward thrust, to which once again Arthur dodged. Brain once again planned to switch the edges of his blade toward his foe and swing, however unfortunately Arthur did not wish to play the same game. Arthur quickly got up close and invaded the man's personal space before swinging his right arm towards Brain's chest. Bam! The swing connected and Brain felt the force of the attack, forcing his eyes to bulge out of his eyes before he felt a hand grab his shirt and was launched off the ground. His sword left his hands as his body went up and was then pulled down and was slammed back onto the ground with enough force to push the air out of his lungs. Gasp! Gasp! Arthur had used his right arm, slammed it against Brain's chest, and since one of Brain's arms was held out straight, Arthur used that to hook his arm and grab the man's shirt, lifted him up and slammed him back down, and now Brain was on the floor struggling to breathe, coughing and wheezing. Arthur then caught the man's sword that had flown into the air and tossed it back to him. You son of a bitch! You think you're going to get away with this? One of the mercenaries shouted as he and his comrades suddenly began preparing for a fight. However, before Arthur could do anything, Brain stood up. He held his hand up, silencing them as he took a moment to properly gather his breath. This is a duel between him and I won't let you pieces of shit ruin this for me. Brain informed Brain. It was clear to him that the knight's arrogance was not misplaced. If he is powerful with the sword as he is without it, then, as a swordsman, Brain needs to see that skill, and so it matches up with the Gazef he has in his mind. One thing's for certain. Arthur raised his brow in a bit of confusion. Though Gazef is a swordsman, he never shied away from using his hands and feet in a sword fight. If there's an opening but he can't reach with a sword, then he'd use his hand to punch or his foot to kick. I can sew what you're doing being a sort of inspiration from that style of fighting, a mix of hand-to-hand and swordplay, but you separate them unlike Gazef. Brain explained, and Arthur could not help but wonder where he got all of that from. He was only fighting hand-to-hand because Excalibur would be overkill against someone like Brain. He didn't plan to use the sword on people that were weak. Arthur, however, decided not to correct the man and let him believe whatever he thinks. It wasn't like it was going to help him anyway. Now that I've got you figured out, let's do this for real. Arthur smirked, amused by the man. He could understand what Shaltir felt when she fought against the man in the anime. There was just something amusing about watching someone weaker than you speak as if they've already had the upper hand. As you already know, my name is Brain Ungloss. Arthur Pendragon. Well then, Arthur, come at me if you dare. Brain informed before grabbing his sword and taking a low crouching stance. He then erected the sword barrier. Just so you know, no one survived this technique. The mercenaries smirked, already assured of his victory. Of course that was a lie. This would be the first time he uses it on a person, but he was confident that no one could survive it. This was his magnum opus, the peak of his martial art, and he was certain none could survive it. Is that so? Arthur took a step forward, walking towards his foe, and Brain closed his eyes and waited. There were no doubts in his mind, and he could visualize his attack slicing through his opponents with ease, like a warm knife through God flash, whistling wind. Arthur stepped onto the sword barrier, and in a fraction of a second after his foot touched the barrier, Brain's sword was swung so fast that it became a blur. The blade whistled as it sliced through the air with practically zero resistance or hesitance. Blut vene. Clink. The sound of metal hitting metal echoed throughout the forest, rendering everything else silent. Impossible. Brain had opened his eyes and witnessed something he thought was unthinkable. God Flash was his life's work. He spent a painstaking amount of time developing it and perfecting it to its peak. What he saw right now told him that everything he worked towards was for naught. The hard work he put in was useless. The sense of pride he had for the technique. What use was all that hard work if the technique he thought placed him at pinnacle of martial art? What use was it if a single man could catch it with his bare hands? Was that it? Disappointing. Arthur said mockingly as he watched Brain drop to his knees. The confidence and pride left his eyes replaced by nothing. In a single instance, Brain had suddenly lost pride in himself and his skills. Boss. Yo boss, what's going on? Get up. His men beckoned, but he ignored them. They did not care for him, and their relationship was purely business, meaning if they lose Brain, their mercenaries group was practically done for. Do you surrender, Brain Ungloss? Yes, I surrender. He answered. If his skills meant nothing to the man before him, then it made no difference if he was a subordinate or a slave to him. Arthur could not help but feel sad for the man. The powers Arthur has were given to him, he didn't earn them through hard work like Brain and everyone else. Seeing a man being betrayed by his own hard work made Arthur feel like a fraud. It wasn't talent that beat Brain, Arthur simply cheated, his entire existence was simply cheating. Good, now we can work on making you stronger. Arthur informed, the least he can do is repay the man and make stronger. Show him that his hard work wasn't useless, he just so happened to be unfortunate by meeting a cheat existence. Hope y'all enjoyed. Next chapter 8 Fingers gets a talking to. Power stoned. 14 comments 0 vote. Pissed. Download the app for additional rewards. More events, more perks. Winning you more free perks. Download now. Shinam_sensational. Download app now. Unexpected decision. It's not the end of the world, you know. Arthur stated as he watched the man sitting across him on the carriage exude the aura of a man that had given up on life. His head was hung low, his shoulders slumped and he sat with his legs open. Just by his sitting position one could tell that Brain was not happy. It is for me. He answered, his voice completely void of any confidence that he had hours ago. Arthur could not help being reminded of his life back on Earth. Depression was a bitch and unfortunately for Brain Arthur was no therapist or a motivational speaker. The world is bigger than you know, there's always someone better. He said, trying to at least make the man feel less depressed, although he felt unqualified to do so as in this case, he was that someone better. Are you trying to encourage me? Is it working? No. What I'm getting at, Brain, is that just because there's always someone better doesn't mean a loss should discourage you. It must feel like you wasted your time, but trust me, you didn't. You just need to train more and you too can be that someone better. Arthur said he did not actually believe that his words will do much for Brain, especially coming from him, a person who has no right to talk about hard work. Anyway, we're here. From today onwards you'll be working for me. Think of it as a fresh start. Train more, then challenge me again some time later. Arthur said as much as he tapped Brain in the shoulder, signaling him that it was time to get off the carriage. Exiting the carriage he was greeted by the sight of Renner, Lycius and Edstrom, who wore a maid outfit. Renner smiled at him and caused him to smile too. He took notice of slight change in Lycius's facial expression before she put on a neutral smile. Deciding to ignore it, he spoke. I'm back and I've brought the man who nearly bested Gazef, Brain Ungloss. Arthur stepped aside and let the two see the man, who did nothing to make himself look a bit presentable. He merely stepped off the carriage and greeted Renner in the most monotone voice before stepping to Arthur's side. His behavior caused the two women to be puzzled. Why is he depressed? Lycius asked with a bit of concern in her voice. He's fine, he just needs to sleep for a bit. He lied. He felt that it would not be good for Brain's self-image if he told them he's depressed because he lost a duel. Acknowledging Arthur's lie, the four then walked towards the castle as Renner began to inform Arthur of what happened while he was out. Brain and Edstrom walking behind them. As they walked, Lycius stopped and spoke. Apologies, Princess Renner and Arthur, I had a quest with my team today, so I'll be leaving. Oh. I suppose there isn't anything to discuss, so it's fine, see tomorrow then. It actually might be a few days before we return from the quest, I apologize for that. I suppose I got used to seeing you often. Alright, see you later then. Renner bid farewell and Lycius turned around and left. However, both Arthur and Renner could not help but feel that something was wrong, although Renner had a clue to what it might be and she could decide whether that was a good thing or not. While this was happening, within the throne room, a few nobles were gathered, including all the members of the royal family excluding Renner. Under normal circumstances, there should be no royal family member that is excluded from such meetings, however the king has to make an exception, besides that the meeting wasn't actually an official meeting and only the relevant and important nobles were present. This isn't an official meeting, however we must discuss the news we received yesterday. I'm sure you all have heard them by now. The king addressed and received nods from all the people in the room. Renner wasted no time in divulging the news of Arthur capturing members of Six Arms. Not only that, but she also alluded to the idea of Arthur having killed at least one Six Arms member and the two others ran. What is our next move, Your Highness? Arthur has proven to be an incredibly valuable asset. First the undead situation in Yggdrassil, then he defeated the giant basilisk, and now this. This is the first time in history we've managed to deal such a blow to 8 Fingers. Marquis Raven stated his original goal in backing one of the princes was because he wished to assume the title of Duke, which would put him in a straight line to the throne. That was still the goal, however now there's a possibility that he may have backed the wrong horse and Renner might take the throne. If Arthur continues to achieve more under her, then becoming queen is practically guaranteed. It's worth noting that there's no rule or law that state no woman can rule the kingdom, it's just that a prince is favored more than a princess and the throne always goes to the firstborn son provided there's no competition, even if there is the odds are in favor of the firstborn. However, there's nothing saying a princess can't sit on the throne, it's just that traditionally it's been a prince that does so and it's hard to break tradition. That is what this impromptu meeting is for, Marquis, to discuss our next move. It would be a loss if we let Arthur slop through our fingers. Does anyone have any suggestions? I have one, Your Majesty. Margrave Yarovana spoke up. It was clear to everyone that Renner planned to use Arthur as way to garner favor and solidify her claim over the throne. Any accomplishment done by Arthur will be attributed to her. Arthur may not be officially her knight, but he's still under her as such. His previous acts are taken as her accomplishments, as it is assumed that he was acting under her command. Well then, please share with us, Margrave. Everyone already had an inkling of what the Margrave had to say. It was fairly obvious that the next step to ensuring Arthur's support of the kingdom was to knight him. That is what everyone was thinking. Why not give Arthur the title of Baron? Raven was the first to react as his eyes bulged to the size of saucers. He was then followed by Nazzarick, who had a similar reaction. Isn't that a bit too much? Regardless of his accomplishments, a noble title is far too much a reward. Marquis Baloop stated. To everyone it seemed like a reasonable objection, however Baloop would much rather avoid having a monster like that in the noble court. Being in the same room as Arthur was something akin to a nightmare. It seemed everyone had the same thought, as they believed that a noble title was too much. However, Marquis Raven was able to understand what Margrave Yarovana was getting at. By completely bypassing the knight status completely and making Arthur a noble, they're successful be able to separate Arthur's accomplishments from Renner and thus halting her progress towards the throne. Of course the two can work together, however they would be separate entities working together rather than one. A knight acts according to the orders of their lord, as such anything they do they did because their lord instructed them so. If Gazef were to slay a dragon, then that would be attributed as an accomplishment of the king rather than Gazef. Gazef will be praised for the kill, but it was the king who ordered it, and this no dragon would be killed without that order. Father, I believe Margrave Yarovana is correct. Arthur is far too valuable, plus I have no doubt that Arthur will accomplish greater things in the coming war with Baharuth, so why no give him the noble's title in advance. Nazzarick supported the idea. Stripping Renner of the power she was confident and essentially holding back her advancement to the throne was something he wanted. Nazzarick already had a slew of material against Barbro that would be useful when the time comes, but Renner was a sheltered princess with hardly a speck of dirt to use against. He hadn't been worried about her since she wasn't going for the throne before, but the moment she did it seemed like she'd be unstoppable, but the matter of stopping her was to simply strip her of her knight. It was almost comical how simple it was. Indeed, Prince Nazzarick speaks the truth. Indeed. I concur. Murmurs could be heard as the various nobles in the room seemed to agree with Nazzarick. Barbro to a glance at Baloop, who shook his head. The Marquis wanted to protest, but with Nazzarick's approval that means Marquis Raven approves it well, and he seems to be the only one against the idea, so it was futile to protest any further. It seems we're at an agreement. Tomorrow, we'll announce this news publicly and hold a ceremony and send a servant to let Sir Arthur be informed of this. Meeting adjourned. The king informed. This was not an official meeting, however such decisions could be made if the relevant parties agree unanimously. The meeting was over, and the nobles exited the throne room. Nazzarick could not help but smile as he watched everyone. This was quite the productive meeting. Wasn't it, Father? Indeed, hopefully Sir Arthur accepts a noble title, and we will have powerful force permanently tied to our kingdom. The king agreed. The king was grateful that such a boon that as Arthur had landed on his kingdom, and he hoped that the kingdom would continue to prosper with the addition of Arthur to its nobles' ranks. Now, the only issue that was left was convincing his daughter to marry. It seems like things won't be going as Renner wanted, and she might lose the power she has. Thoughts on the chapter? Anything out of place or anything that seemed rushed? Please comment and tell me. Also check out fanfic ideas by your truly, and say which idea you'd like for me to serialize. 10 comments 0 vote. Take over. Within Renner's chambers, Arthur and the princess were seated with the tables being the only thing separating them. Edstrom was standing behind Renner while seemingly trying to appear as small as possible and avoiding any eye contact with Arthur. Wait, you're actually stronger than Gazef. Brain Ungloss, who had been unwilling to speak today, shouted with a bit of shock in his voice. I suppose you could say that. So you being taught by Gazef was a lie? I mean, I do train with him. That part was true. So you tricked me. Arthur could only shrug his shoulders, deciding to not confirm nor deny Brain's question. Renner, on the other hand, could not help but find their conversation a little amusing. There is nothing to really complain about though, is there? You'll get to train here with the knight and get the opportunity to train with Gazef, which will help you in your quest to defeat him. This is a win for you. Arthur explained and Brain was prepared to protest further but realized what Arthur was saying is true, plus if Arthur was stronger than Gazef that means his technique God Flash wasn't a complete bust like he thought, at least he was probably strong enough to face Gazef with it. Although the fact that there was someone who could defend against that technique with one hand didn't bring him much joy and only served to prove that he was weak, but at least that person was human, meaning that height of power wasn't impossible. Anyway, let's move back on topic. We were talking about 8 fingers, Renner. Since we have disclosed your triumph over 6 arms, this means that my brother or my father will try to attack 8 fingers now that they're weakened. As such, we need to take over before that happens. Renner informed, the plan was to take over 8 fingers and let the kingdom destroy the criminal organization. Then Renner and Arthur will reform the organization into a new one that will work for the benefit of the kingdom. You can't stop crime from happening, so it's best to just control and minimize it. How do we do that then? That is where you come in, my dear Arthur. Right now, I'm certain 8 fingers has a lack of manpower. We also dealt a significant blow to their bases. This means they're at their weakest right now. Knock knock knock. A knock interrupted Renner's explanation. Deciding not to continue, she told the individual who knocked to come in, and she did. Opening the door, the maid entered. Excuse me, Your Highness, I bring news from the noble court. Go ahead. The king has decreed that Sir Arthur Pendragon will be awarded with the title of Baron, and the ceremony for his ascension to nobility will be held tomorrow at noon. The maid stated, and the room fell into a drawn-out silence. Arthur was more than a little shocked, however the princess held a neutral expression. There was a slight tug as her lips as a smile tried to force itself onto her face, but she remained composed. Thank you for the news, you are relieved. Renner told the maid to leave and the maid left. Well, that's something. The blonde-haired knight spoke first and turned his head towards the princess. Renner placed a hand on her mouth before her mouth stretched into a smile, and she let out a gentle and melodious laughter. Much like a true princess, her laugh was beautiful to hear. Arthur could not help but note the fact that this was the first time she's ever laughed. She mostly giggles rather than actually laughing. After a few seconds, the princess composed her and wiped a small tear off her eye. How transparent, but I suppose this works in my favor as well, helps get rid of an issue that was becoming troublesome to deal with. She said as she looked at Arthur's face and appreciated its features. She wondered if she'd ever seen an individual more attractive. Something the matter, Renner? He asked. I'll inform you about it later. For the time being, let us go and take over 8 fingers. The new maid you acquired for me is very useful, she said, flashing Arthur a beautiful smile that he could not help but be pleased by. Very well. So how are things going on your ends? Hilma queried her colleagues. Her voice seemed tired, and there were bags under her eyes, an indication of tiredness and a lack of sleep. Well, as far as business goes, everything is going well. Zweden answered. He also looked a bit more haggard than usual. His prim and proper attire and look had started to look less and less presentable. Unfortunately, however, now that the entirety of 6 arms is gone, more and more people are getting a little bold, and honestly it's getting a bit tiring. He continued, it has been only a few days since they lost their remaining security department, and with the news they've heard, it seems the cause for their disappearance was because of the princess and her dog. With 6 arms gone, the customers as well as upstart wannabe crime bosses are starting to become bolder by the day. Within such organizations like 8 Fingers, violence was a great negotiating tool, and now that they practically lost it all, the people they've kept silent all this time have begun to test their luck, trying to see what they can and cannot get away with. In hindsight, completely dismantling the security department was a mistake. Hilma stated, even though 6 Arms was only 6 members that were truly powerful, they were quite feared in the underworld, and the fact that they were within 8 fingers was enough to deter most criminals from trying anything. However, now things are different. This is all that bitch's fault. It makes me sick that the people of this kingdom love such wretched ugly little thing. Crocodile spoke. His voice had a much more manly tone to it than usual. His distaste for the princess was never hidden, but right now it was clear as day. Well, it's... Knock knock. Hilma was quickly interrupted by a sudden knock on the door. Everyone in the room gave each other confused looks. They were certain they had informed the servant not to be interrupted. Hilma strolled to the door, her heels clicking and clacking as she walked. She opened the door just enough for half her face to be seen, and she was greeted by one of the servants. I thought we instructed you not to disturb us, she said with a frown on her face. The blonde-haired servant girl shrunk under her stern gaze. Apologies, ma'am, but there's guests who... I don't care, tell them to leave, we don't have time for them. That's quite rude, don't you think, Hilma? Edstrom stepped forward, revealing herself. Edstrom. With the shock from Hilma, Edstrom took advantage and quickly pushed the door open and entered the room and forced Hilma to stagger back. At her entrance all the members of Eight Fingers quickly stood up with shock on their faces. The Edstrom's appearance was shocking, but what was more shocking and the reason they all suddenly stood up was because of the two people behind her. Stepping out of the way, Edstrom allowed for the blonde hair knights to step forward and speak. Good afternoon, I do hope we aren't interrupting anything important. Arthur spoke as he stepped forward, his face showing a neutral expression. Renner stood behind him sporting the same expression. You big th. Ah. Crocodile spat as soon as his eyes saw the image of the princess. How before he could speak any further something sliced his left cheek and forced him to shut up. No need to use such language in front of the lady, keep that up and I'll take your tongue. Arthur informed and properly established a hierarchy in the room. Hilma backed away from them and stood closer to her colleagues. The fact that Crocodile suddenly got a cut on his cheek with 0 hand movements from Arthur told her not to get too close to the man. Unfortunately, distance was irrelevant at this moment. What do you want? Zweden asked. He understood quite quickly that if Arthur and the princess wanted to kill them they would have done so. Plus, why have the princess come here when Arthur could have if the point was to kill the heads of Eight Fingers? To negotiate, or rather to take over Eight Fingers. We aren't going to negotiate anything, Arthur stated, and the heads of Eight Fingers all furrowed their brows at such a statement. You think just because you're threatening us with violence we're just gonna give in? Go fuck yourself and that stupid ugly bitch beside you. Once again Crocodile spat. The other two heads in the room could not help but mentally sigh. Despite his weird nature, Crocodile was often calm. While his distaste for the princess was understandable, now was not the time to let it show. Forgive my colleague, Sir Arthur, but you must understand we cannot simply let what you want happen, hence a negotiation would be appropriate. Hilma quickly covered for Crocodile. She was already tired today and it seemed that she won't get any rest, plus Eight Fingers was in a situation where negotiating with the princess might be helpful. There's nothing to negotiate, either you submit to us or I kill you and we take over Eight Fingers anyway. Splat. Before Crocodile could so much as begin to speak he was silenced, his blood splattered across the wall and his lower half left standing. Both Hilma and Zweden felt the droplet of blood splatter on their faces. Hilma gasped and quickly closed her mouth with her hands as her eyes bulged out their socks in shock and fear, while Zweden on the other hand maintained his posture, keeping a calm expression outwardly, but inwards his reaction was similar to Hilma's reaction. As I was saying, submit or be killed. Arthur let his demon lord's hockey drown the whole room, shielding only Renner from its effects. Barely a second after releasing his aura both individuals took the knee, barely any resistance from them, and Arthur smiled at such a sight. Clap. Excellent. Renner clapped once and spoke. Arthur's part was over, now it was her turn to speak. Thoughts on the chapter? Anything out of place or felt rushed? Please inform me, help me improve. 15 comments 0 vote. Alright, now that new management has been established, let's talk about the structure, or rather the hierarchy of new Eight Fingers. Renner spoke, her smooth and pleasant voice contrasting well with the oppressive atmosphere in the room and relieving the fear of the two remaining members of Eight Fingers. But before we can do that, I do believe there's still someone missing, she informed. That is correct, milady, however do not worry, he will be informed of the changes. Zweden answered promptly. As he felt less and less fear, he glanced at the bloody waist and legs in the room and the wall painted with blood. No hand movements ever happened or occurred from Arthur, yet half of Crocodile's body simply became blood on the wall. The thought of simply running away occurred to him, however leaving Eight Fingers meant leaving the money behind. He hasn't lived like a commoner in years, he can hardly remember the time where he did not have maids waiting on him. This is fine. It's just a change in management, he convinced himself. Taking a glance at Hilma he could tell she had come to the same conclusion as him. The heads of Eight Fingers were greedy, and to run away from the business they had given so much wealth simply idiotic. They just needed to simply swallow their pride a bit. Very well then, if he resists, then informed us, we'll deal with him promptly. Yes ma'am. The two responded, and the princess could not help but feel a bit excited. It was one thing to watch Arthur absolutely dominate the room and showcase his ruthlessness, and it was another to have people like the heads of Eight Fingers be subservient to you. This was another reason why she was prepared to ensure Arthur never leaves her side. His presence gave her power and power gave her control, and it was magnificent to be in control. Now then, for the most part, your positions will remain unchanged, however the difference will be that you report to us about anything and everything. She informed and waited for any objections or complaints, but it seems there are none, so she continued. Secondly, the way in which the various businesses with Eight Fingers function will be slightly changed. This includes the brothels and human trafficking as well as the drugs department. How different will they function? Hilma daringly asked, her eyes refusing to look at the princess directly. The finer details will be discussed at length 2 days from now, but the gist of it, we'll be limiting the amount of drugs in circulation and we'll have all of the prostitutes be properly paid. Don't worry, there won't be a lot of loss in terms of money, so it would be fine, plus you lot don't pay taxes, so there are a lot of dirty money lying around. She said. It was quite obvious that criminal organizations did not pay taxes, but since they've taken it over, it should be fine for the time being at least. You say there won't be a loss in money, but where will it come from? As I have stated, the finer details will be discussed 2 days from now, not unless you want to spend the next few hours discussing this in a room with a dead body and blood walls. Zweden took a look around and concurred with the princess, although he also suspects she's giving them 2 days to properly accept the situation and decide if they want to flee or work under them. Very well then. Good, in the future, my maid over here, Edstrom, will work as my liaison. Obviously as a princess I can't be seen with people like you as such, since she's familiar with all of you. I believe she'll be right for the job. Do you have any complaints, Edstrom? None, milady. The former member of 6 Arms did a small bow as she agreed to the princess's idea. The 2 heads of 8 fingers could not help but raise their eyebrows. It was an odd sight. In the future, you should expect the other 2 to return to you as well, although both Zero and Succulent are dead, unlike Malmvist and Persherian, who are still in the dungeon. Renner informed. Unlike Edstrom, the other 2 6 Arms members needed to stay in the dungeon for the time being. The 2 former heads of 8 fingers nodded to her words. They had questions about what she said, but the smell of a dead body was starting to permeate the room. If there are no questions, then we shall take our leave. If you want to run or hide, I advise against that. Despite how it might seem, you won't lose much of your power, so do try and relax. With that said, both Arthur and Renner exited the room, leaving the 2 individuals to suddenly collapse on the floor as the tension was released from the bodies. Hilma let out an audible sigh before turning her head towards Zweden and asked a question. What do we do? If we trust her words about us retaining our status in 8 fingers, then we do nothing. It's business as usual. I'd rather live under her rule than lose all my wealth. Zweden informed, and Hilma could only silently agree to his statement. The next day in the afternoon, the throne room was filled with all the nobles of the kingdom. The ceremony was short notice, but as it usually is announced a week before. However, the king wished to quickly have Arthur join the noble ranks of the kingdom, and most of the nobles understood and thus made time for the ceremony. Today is a wonderful afternoon, as we, the one blessed with power to lead the people of Re-Esti's kingdom, are gathered to welcome another to our ranks. The king spoke as he stood on his throne, and Arthur was bowed beneath the steps that led to the throne, listening to the king give his speech. On this day we welcome Arthur Pendragon into the noble ranks of our kingdom. Although he may be of foreign origin, the valiant deeds he has done for our kingdom deserves a greater reward than just mere gold. The king continued to speak and took a few steps forward and arrived before Arthur. He descended a single step before holding out the scepter in his hand. The scepter was an ornate stick made from gold and crowned with small jewels that made it head. As such, by the power vested in me by the very land this castle was built upon, the very land that shelters the people of this kingdom, I, King Ramposa III, king of the Vaself royal bloodline, bestow upon you, Arthur Pendragon, the noble title of Baron. Henceforth, you shall be referred to as Baron Pendragon. Do you accept? I accept the honor, my liege. Arthur answered, and the king placed the scepter on one side of his shoulders before moving and placing it on the other side. Now stand, Baron Pendragon. Arthur stood, and his gaze met that of the king. Do you swear to both uphold and ensure the law of the Re-Esti's kingdom is not broken? I swear. Do you swear to protect the citizens and drive off the enemies of the Re-Estis? I swear. Do you swear to always ensure the prosperity of your people and the kingdom as a whole? I swear. Then go, Baron Pendragon, and do as you have sworn. Yes, my liege. With those words out of his mouth, resounding claps echoed throughout the room, with many nobles shouting, "Congratulations!" Unfortunately, their clapping was halted not by the king but by the princess. She needed to only raise a hand. The king looked at her daughter in confusion. There was not anything she was scheduled to say at this ceremony. However, deciding to trust his daughter, he gave her the floor, allowing her to speak. The beautiful and radiant princess stood up and walked towards Arthur. Her illustrious long hair shimmered a beautiful golden hue as it was struck by the light of the sun. Her magnificent blue eyes sparkled brightly as her gaze was fixated on the newly appointed baron. The golden princess was beautiful, and none could ever contest or disagree with that statement. It was simply fact, just as the rising sun was a fact. Baron Pendragon, amongst everyone in this room, I am the one who have spent the most time with. Her beautiful melodious voice echoed in the room, forcing all within to hear and appreciate its splendor. Arthur gave a nod. As such I have seen your valor in your heart firsthand and can attest to your bravery and conviction. Although it may have been unofficial, you were still my knight and you took your duty to protect me seriously, and because of that I believe being a baron is still too small a reward. At this point, everyone in the room had gone deeper into confusion. They could not follow what she seemed to be getting at. What reward could she offer? As such, I believe along with your ascension to nobility, I offer you my hand in marriage. Do you accept? Renner stretched out her hand towards Arthur, and the Baron took it, gave it a peck on the back palm before turning it and giving another peck on the front palm. I accept, my lady. It took a minute for everyone to understand what had transpired. Renner had offered her hand in marriage to the new Baron, and he accepted. Zanak was the first to have his eyes bulge out his head before exclaiming the word that came out of everyone's mouth. 1. Okay, we're getting into economics now and I was never good at that subject, so if you or please help, I have some questions. Would it cause inflation if the money taken from 8 Fingers was used for infrastructure and stuff? Like, for instance, whenever 8 Fingers have surplus profit, Renner uses it to improve the kingdom's roads and housing, etc. If the answer is yes, how do you work around it? This should be the conclusion of this arc. However, like I said, there's going to be some character POVs like Lycaeus and Gazef, as well as the POVs for the Baharuth Empire and Slain Theocracy. Also, should I write Arthur fighting the dragons or should he just have the tamed in the next arc? Cause I don't feel like writing a chapter like, but I also think it would be nice little side quest. What do you guys think? 19 comments, 0 vote. Interlude. Roar. The ogre let out a final battle cry as it fell to ground defeated. The leader of Blue Rose promptly cut off its head, ensuring the death of the creature. However, despite how she had just slain the creature, her mind was elsewhere, completely occupied with other matters. That was the last of them. Her teammate and their trusted arcane mage, Evely, informed. Currently, they were within the Great Forest of Tob, and the quest they were given was one that required them to eliminate a type of monster alliance that threatened the livelihood of the nearby villages. Hey Lycaeus. Yeah, what is it, Evely? Are you okay? Yeah, of course I am. Lycaeus gave a smile as she said, reassuring her friend that she was all right. Of course, Evely was not convinced, however she decided not to pry and chose to wait until Lycaeus was ready to tell. If standing there looking like a zombie means you're okay, then okay. Lycaeus could sigh and shake her head towards her friend. She was correct that something was wrong, however Lycaeus was unwilling to share at the moment. Hey Lycaeus, can you tell these two to stop thinking I'm some type of monster? I think they might actually be convinced of that. Gagaron beckoned to Lycaeus, and she looked at the twins, who had amused smiles on their faces. Are you sure you aren't? We've never seen you bleed before. Evely stated teasingly. Obviously that was a lie, but she was not above messing around, plus they've just finished a job, so they had time to relax. What are you talking about? You seen me bleeding plenty of times. Name one. Tina stated, and Evely nodded her head. You can't be serious. Gagaron said in exasperation. It seemed that her teammates were determined to keep playing this game. I mean, if you want to prove to us you're human, then yes. We still love you regardless, so you don't have to prove anything. The twins stated with amusement on their faces. Gagaron groaned at her friends. They really liked playing around, which contrasts with the image most people have of Blue Rose, although she herself wouldn't say that's a bad thing. How about that one time where? Gagaron began listing off the various times she's bled in battle, but the twins and Evely kept denying that they ever saw such a thing, causing Gagaron to have to continue listing off the times she's bled. While her friends were having a bit of fun, Lycaeus could not help but think about Arthur. She hadn't thought that she liked him. I mean, she liked him as a friend and she thought he was quite interesting with interesting stories to tell. He was strong and made her want to get stronger, not to mention he seemed to play along with her antics, even if just teasing. He didn't do it in a way that made her feel bad about it. Yeah, sure, she definitely thought he was handsome, but you can acknowledge that and still be friends with someone, right? She figured that her friendship was just that, a friendship. It seemed that she was wrong, or perhaps she wasn't wrong, it's just that hearing that Renner liked Arthur made her feel some type of way. She could properly see what that feeling was, jealousy or envy, but what she knew was that she did not feel as happy as she portrayed. At the time she thought nothing of it. Renner was her friend. If she found someone she likes, then that was good, however one cannot help how they feel about things. This sucks. She thought as she mentally sighed. It's not like she was looking for someone to like. In fact, she has never actively thought about the idea of getting a partner, mostly because she's a holy maiden and because of that such things were never in the forefront of her mind. Did she like Arthur? That was a bit unclear, or rather she didn't want to, because that would mean their relationship as friends would change, and that would be a betrayal to Renner, her friend. The young woman could not help but run her glove hand through her hair as she thought more about the situation. Lycius. Huh. Are you coming? What? There's a village nearby, so we're going to visit. Are you just going to stand there? Oh no, I'm coming. She took hurried steps to catch up to Evely. It seemed as though the other 3 members of their group were already ahead of them. Are you sure you're all right? Yeah, I'm fine. Evely was once again not convinced but decided to let her be. As stated before, she believed that Lycius would share when she was willing. Sweat trickled down his face, from the top of his head down to his cheeks like a waterfall before dripping onto the ground like heavy rain. His body was hot like a furnace, and his muscles demanded a break from such arduous training. Gazeff's determination drove him to the absolute pinnacle of tiredness and fatigue, yet the image of the blonde knight brought a fierce feeling of rivalry in his heart and one that refused to let him rest. Tomorrow would be one of his designated day-offs and Gazeff planned to train until the sun came up. The time of day was nighttime, hence the empty training ground. It was the perfect time for him to practice his swordsmanship without care and focus solely on developing his skills as a warrior. Unlike mages who rely on spellbooks and the like to acquire new spells to get stronger, for warriors there was no such. One mastered a martial art through rigorous repetitive training. If you wished to a speed-related martial art, it was necessary to run. It was hard, but Gazeff would have it no other way. You know, it's unhealthy to train so hard, Gazeff. Gazeff halted his swings and turned to his left and looked at the individual that spoke. Shock registered on his face as he saw the blue-haired swordsman. Brain huff. Huff, unbloss. Gazeff spoke between his breaths. He hadn't seen the man in a long while, but he does remember one of the king's retainer mentioned something about Arthur seemingly entering the castle with him. Did Arthur recruit him? The one and only. I see you're hard at work. Mind if I join you? Huff, course. The chief warrior stated. He could not help but notice a slight sadness in the man's eyes, like he had lost something and had no idea how to get it back. Thank you, although you did get a head start on me. I suppose I did. How are you, Brain? I haven't seen you since the tournament, never had someone give me a run for my money like you have. Thanks for the compliment, I've been doing all right, mastered a whole new technique to best you with it. Brain answered, and at his words about a new technique, Gazeff's eyes held a glint of interest. Oh really? What do you call such a technique? Honestly, I'm no longer proud of it anymore. It was my finisher, the pinnacle of my swordsmanship and hard work, but now it's just a failure of a sword technique. He stated before he let himself fall onto his buttocks and looked up at the sky. Although the training grounds were considered within the castle, they were actually outside. It's just that in order to get to them you had to enter the castle, and in order to exit them you had to do the same thing. What happened? Oh, nothing much. I just met Arthur, and he stopped my technique with his bare hand. What? Yeah, couldn't even make him draw his sword. I was so outmatched that I couldn't even be a threat to him. Gazeff could not help but remain silent. He knew Arthur was strong, however he did not know that a person like Brain would be just child's play. Has he been holding back this entire time? Honestly, Gazeff, what even is the point of all this training if it will never amount to much in the face of those actually powerful? A puzzling question that Gazeff felt unqualified to answer but still answered regardless. One thing and one thing only, Brain. And what is that? Grab some food and try again. Huh. I'm saying you simply need to work harder, rest, eat, and work even harder. Every loss is a lesson on our shortcomings, and if we let a loss discourage us we'll never improve and better, and besides Arthur is still human, that means the strength he has can be achieved by human hands. Gazeff explained, and Brain looked at him with a neutral expression. His heart could not feel inspired at all. So let's do just that, Brain, let's reach that level of strength with our own human hands like he did. I guess we can do that. Brain answered, although Gazeff could tell it would take some time before the man had his confidence back. He must have had a great deal of confidence in that technique of his. Not guess, we will. The knight stated firmly, assuring both himself and Brain. This was supposed to come out on Thursday, but I got lazy and procrastinated. Plus, I got hooked on the anime Dungeon Meshi on Friday. Ignore that author's notes, it's not relevant as this was written weeks ago. But Dungeon Meshi is peak, actually peak. Interlude again. The Baharuth Empire was a country that has enjoyed moderate levels of development in the past couple of years ever since the Bloody Emperor took the throne. Compared to the Re-Estais kingdom, the empire was leagues above it both in military might and in economic growth. Unlike the king of the kingdom, the emperor had the nerve to completely dismantle and cull a large majority of the nobility and only kept those that would be loyal and useful to the development of the empire. New policies and laws were put in place, such as the banishment of slavery. Land that belonged to the noble was taken back by the throne and was used for agricultural purposes, housing and to further develop the nation. This caused the feared bloody emperor to gain the favor of the masses and is now considered the greatest ruler in the history of the empire. With his wisdom the empire became a thriving nation. It still had problems, but compared to its neighboring kingdoms, the Dragonic Kingdom and Riest Kingdom, it was better off. The young Emperor Gerchiniv Rune Farlord El Nix could be seen seated on a wide couch within the open room, that was specifically built for relaxing. The room was located on the upper floors of the castle with an open view of the castle grounds, allowing the Emperor to receive a good amount of the summer breeze and witness the clear skies of the day. His golden blonde short hair swayed as the nice and cool breeze passed through the room. On his hands, he held a piece of paper as his eyes scanned it over, reading its contents. The documents concerned the effects of having abolished slavery. There were some losses, however there were benefits as well. The emperor, though he may seem power-hungry, his main concern was the prosperity and well-being of his empire, as such something like slavery had no place in it. "Hey old man." The emperor spoke as he placed the paper on the table and looked at the direction of perhaps the most skilled magician in the world, Fluter Paradine. "Yes, what is it?" Fluter answered. His form was hunched over near a table that was at the corner of the room, looking over a map and some of his notes. Fluter was among the only people who are allowed to address the emperor however they please. "Do you want to join the war this year?" Fluter's ears perked up as he heard the curious question. Despite having a 6th-tier magic caster at its disposal, the empire never once used it to win the little skirmishes it annually has with the kingdom. "What do you mean?" "Don't play coy with me, old man. That map you're looking over, you're specifically focusing on the Riesti's kingdom. You're curious about the light, are you not?" Gerchiniv deduced, and Fluter could only sigh in defeat. The emperor was quite clever. Besides, it's not like he was actively trying to hide his interest in the kingdom. Even from far away he could feel the amount of pure mana released by that golden light. "I suppose you could say I am, your majesty, or rather you could say I'm a bit impatient and wondering when you'll finally crush the kingdom. You certainly have the power to do so, and with me it would hardly be a war." Fluter explained. His goal in life was to know more and discover the secrets of magic. That was what he dedicated his years to, as such a sudden light that was so bright it turned night into day sparked his curiosity, and he needed to know what caused it and whether it's possible to replicate with his current level of skill. "I suppose you're right, and from what my contacts are telling me, the creepy princess is aiming for the throne. She's a cunning vixen that will make things difficult." He placed his hand on his chin as he began to think deeply. The original plan was to slowly dwindle the military might of the kingdom while also bribing nobles with promises of giving them land and eventually crushing the kingdom with all the military might of the Baharuth Empire. These annual skirmishes were hardly using the full might of the empire, so they had more than enough power to claim victory once everything was in place. However, this was all possible because the king of the Riesti's kingdom was incompetent with even more incompetent retainers. Renner, at the throne she will turn things around and quite possibly force a situation where he has to marry her. However, he'd rather die than marry her. Plus, she has a new pawn, called the Swordless Swordsman, rumored to be more powerful than Gazef. It seems if we don't seize the opportunity, it might slip through our fingers. The war with the kingdom was only a few months away, and within a few months it's possible for Renner to completely claim the throne. If she has a powerful knight by her side and has a lot of support from the masses, she could stage a coup and would most likely succeed. "What are you thinking about, your majesty?" Fluter rubbed his long beard as he stared at the young emperor, deep in thought. Sometimes he often pities the young 22-year-old. At the mere age of 12 he was forced to kill his own family and rule over a country by himself. It was tragic to say the least. The crown prince is the one that is most incompetent in the royal family, and he has greedy supporters. Gerchiniv stated. Rather than rush his decision in conquering the Riesti's kingdom, it was better to have someone that is Renner on the throne, which in turn will mean he does not have to rush things. He's also the one most ambitious and stubborn. He might be difficult to handle. No, he's perfect. That means he's the one most likely to have a bad temper. That would work in our favor. The war is a few months away. Let's prepare. This will be among the last wars we have with the kingdom. Gerchiniv firmly stated. He did not want to rush, but speeding things up a bit should not be a problem. The slain theocracy was a highly religious country that believed and worshipped the 6 great gods, powerful individuals that are said to have come from another world. It was these 6 individuals that founded the country that is now the slain theocracy 600 years ago and established themselves as gods, although that may have been unintentional on their part. Among the many countries within this world, the slain theocracy is perhaps the one country with a clear and definite distaste for any of the races that are non-human. It is because of this that slave trade within the theocracy primarily deal with non-humans. It is strictly a human nation that was made for human. Much like the Baharuth Empire, the theocracy has little to no form of nobility and is amongst the most developed countries in the continent, even surpassing the development of the Baharuth Empire in both technological development and military might. At this moment 6 individuals were seated within a round table, all of them looked to be aging old men, only one woman in their ranks, in the later years of their life with the exception of one person who seemed to be still in the Middle Ages. I see you all are in good health. Raymond Zarg Lorenzen, the Cardinal of Earth, stated to his fellow cardinals, the highest authority within the slain theocracy. The young man compared to the rest of the cardinals was a dark brown man with keen eyes. I see you still can't properly speak without insulting our age. Dominic Yerpartuch, the Cardinal of Wind, responded, his brows furrowed deeply, not appreciating the perceived insult from his colleagues. We're here to discuss important matters. There's no need to show your insecurities, Dominic. The sole woman in the room spoke dismissively. She was Berenice Nagua Santini, the Cardinal of Fire, and she wished to have this meeting over and done with. Dominic did not take kindly to her comment but held his tongue. As Berenice stated, the issues we're here to discuss are important, and thus, we must not waste time, so let's begin with the incident in the Re-Estais kingdom. Zinedine Delengelfi, the Cardinal of Water stated, trying to move the conversation back to the important stuff. At present, we are unaware of what causes the light. An investigation is required if we wish to know more about it. A man wearing round-rimmed glasses spoke, simply getting to the point of it all. The man was Maximilien Oriol Lagier, and he was the Cardinal of Darkness. The light turned night into day, that's only something a god of light can achieve. This could mean our god of light is preparing for a resurrection. Another one of the cardinals pipes up. He was the Cardinal of Light Yvonne Jasna Delacroix, his voice was quite firm and fervent. Despite how it might seem, the slain theocracy was divided into 6 factions, each dedicated to the 6 gods, however these factions were capable of working together when necessary. Calm down, that could have simply been a magic item or a legendary item or weapon. The Black Scripture has one of those. We need to conduct a proper investigation first before coming to conclusions. Maximilian fixed his glasses as he spoke, although he said all that he could help but hold a bit of fear in his heart. A descent of a new god was not something they needed, especially considering it might not even be on of their gods. Then the matter is simply, is it not? Have Thousand Leagues astrologers survey the location, and we'll send one of the scriptures to do a thorough investigation. Zinedine stated and offered a simple solutions. We can't do a thorough investigation because that would require a whole team, and there's no doubt the magicians of the kingdom are probably already occupying the location. Berenice offered. She doubted the idea that the golden light was some sort of descending of a god. It was most likely an item that had either been used or found, meaning if it's truly powerful the theocracy would need to seize it. If there are no solutions to, then why are we even talking about? There are more important matters like the possible resurrection of the catastrophe dragon and the dragon kingdom's pleas for reinforcements. Dominic cut through, deciding that if there were no solutions it was better to leave it be until the more important issues are dealt with. The rest of the cardinals seemed to agree with his statement. Then we shall put this matter on pause and save it for the latter part of the meeting. Now then, on to other business. Maximilian promptly stated and had everyone move on from the topic and onto another, and without issue the other moved along as well. It was common to have situation like thus where an issue has shelved for later. Raymond felt the matter needed more attention but said nothing about it. Sorry y'all, school is opened and the update schedule will be significantly slower. 11 comments 0 vote. Training exercise. Renner stood at a balcony, one that overlooked the training grounds. Down below was Arthur and all the members of Blue Rose doing a training exercise. This was supposed to be a simple exercise that was requested by Lachias as a way to see how powerful Arthur truly is and what it would take to catch up to him. Arthur agreed to it, citing that it would be fun. Renner found it entertaining watching Arthur fights as she wanted to watch. Unfortunately, however, news of this was heard by a few nobles and her father, and now a few nobles came to witness the exercise. It's been a week since his ascension to nobility. I wonder what he thinks about that. The king spoke as he sat beside his daughter. Renner knew this was just a roundabout way of leading the conversation into the matter about her decision to marry Arthur. Indeed, although if you want to know his thoughts on the matter, you should ask him. She stated. I suppose I will, but daughter, I must ask. The king said, and Renner held the urge to roll her eyes. This would be the first time they're having this conversation, however she has been expecting it. Due to Arthur's ascension there were things that the king needed to do, so didn't particularly have the time until now. Why did you offer your hand in marriage to Arthur? The royal family is in a situation where we can't antagonize the noble and need to strengthen ties with noble families. The king stated, between the two princes, whomever ascends the throne will most likely not be accepted by one of the factions and that may spark a coup. Zanak might just let it be and let Barbaro rule if he loses, but Barbaro certainly will not allow for anyone but him to sit on the throne. As such, if Zanka sends a coup is practically guaranteed. I have already stated at the ceremony of his ascension why I wish to marry him. Renner stated nonchalantly as her eyes focused on Arthur taking on all members of Blue Rose at once. She didn't understand why he chose to train while wearing only trousers and leaving his torso naked, but she can't say she doesn't like seeing his bare skin and body. She also found it amusing how Lycius and her team just could not land a single hit on her future husband. I understand that, my daughter, but you must understand, as members of the royal family, it's our duty to ensure the stability of the throne and kingdom. What the king needed out of this was people who will fight for the royal family regardless of who takes the throne. The nobles are greedy, even those that are part of the royalty faction. If an opportunity presents itself and guarantees them money and land, they'll switch to whatever side. By having Renner marry a high-ranking noble or one that is associated with a noble with influence, that can at least guarantee their loyalty. Worst part about such situations is once a civil war broke out, most nobles would want the throne, and in order for the royal family to get allies it would need to promise its allies a reward of land, which would work against them in the long run as that diminishes the royal family's power. Indeed, you are correct in that regard, father, but I am selfish, but I suppose you're better than me in that regard, your majesty. Renner stated, and the king could not help but feel the sting of those words. Although they were disguised as a compliment to his selflessness of putting the kingdom before everything else, they were also veiled dig at him for putting the kingdom before his own family, or at the very least that's how he interpreted her words. Of course Renner did not wish to make her father feel remorse for the way he chose to be. She hardly cared. Her words were meant to illustrate the difference between her and the king, and they also doubled as advice for him to stop trying to please the nobles, although she didn't care if he understood that or not. I see. He stated he knew his daughter was smart, as he figured that she would at least do things logically. As royalty, it's only logical that he'd want the stability of the kingdom and the continued reign of the Vazelf family. He had figured Renner would understand that. But then again, what reason would she have to listen to me? He thought. He broke the promise of letting her marry on her own terms, so she decided to disregard his word entirely and do things her way. He supposed that was fair on her part. Forcing the issue would not really help. Perhaps if he had been more of a father she would listen to him. I suppose I can't force you to do things you don't want, and what kind of father would I be if I didn't at least accept the decisions you make? He stated before standing from his chair. While it would be interesting to watch a training exercise, he had matters to attend to. Although he could not help but feel guilty about Renner's earlier comment, he wondered if his wife was alive, would his relationship with his children be better? Saying his goodbyes, Renner bowed as he left, and her eyes returned back to the training exercise below. Clank. The sound of steel against steel echoed, followed by the sudden gust of wind that was created by the shock wave of the two objects. Lycius creased her brows in slight frustration as the man before stopped her attack with his bare hands. No doubt he was durable, but she was also quite strong. That attack should have sliced through him regardless of his durability. Well, at least she managed to have his feet sink into the ground. Her eyes wandered and took a curious glance towards his lean muscled figure, and a small blush graced her cheeks. Arthur smirked at the sight, seeing that Lycius felt embarrassed and used more of her strength to push further down on him. With Arthur now firmly placed in one spot, Gagaron came in full speed from the side with her battle hammer ready to full swing. Seeing this, Arthur let the sword that he was stopping from reaching him. He let it reach him by pulling back his arm. This sudden action caused Lycius to lurch forward, allowing Arthur to grab her arm with one and pulling her towards himself, and then grabbing her clothes and tossing her over the other side before swiftly dodging the attack from Gagaron. Whoosh. The hammer whistled past him as it missed, and he spun around and delivered a kick to her torso and sent her flying to the same direction Lycius had landed on. However, unbeknownst to Arthur, when he kicked Gagaron, an impermissible figure jumped from within her shadow and entered his, like a frog entering a lake. Huh. It was because of this figure entering his shadow that he now was unable to move an inch. His body was locked into place, incapable of moving. Probably one of the twins. I remember one of them having a shadow-related technique. He thought as he heard Evely cast a spell. Maximize magic. Magic arrow. With Arthur now in place, Evil Eye attacked, using a maximize on a low-tier spell to gauge his durability. Seeing that he was trapped and unable to move, Arthur decided to let the attack hit. If he's locked into place, Ultra Instinct could not help him dodge, so instead he used Blood Venet. Up until now he has only used it on his hands to block attacks. Before the attacks landed, the figures in his shadow quickly jumped out, freeing him from its shadow possession, and Arthur was unable to dodge, as immediately afterwards he was held in place by a bunch of steel-like threads. Boom. The attack landed, causing the attackers to watch in anticipation so they may assess the damage and plan their next The smoke settled and was revealed to be unscathed. Damn, he's tough. Yeah, although this is a better alternative than not being able to land a single attack on him. Lycaeus stated to Gagaron as the rest of her team came towards her direction. We knew he was tough when this training exercise began. We just need to try again. Evely stated as she and the twins arrived before their teammates. This training exercise would be good for all of them as it would show how much they need to improve. You okay, Lycaeus? You seem distracted. Arthur addresses Lycaeus with a teasing smirk. What? I'm distracted. You sure, because your eyes have been wondering? No, they haven't. Shut up. Yes, they were. Nah, they weren't. The adventurer profusely denied with a blush on her cheek. Embarrassment marred her face, especially so since her friends were beside her and were hearing the conversation. Oh my god, this is a training exercise. Evely expressed with an eye roll, the twins into a protective position, protecting Lycaeus. The evil boss will be taken. Protect evil boss's innocence. They spoke as Gagaron laughed and patted Lycaeus on the back, silently encouraging her. Lycaeus could not help but groan in embarrassment and frustration. Her friends enjoyed her bashfulness. Let's just continue the exercise instead of talk about nonsense, she said, trying to move on from this topic. We can do that if you admit your eyes were wondering. Arthur teased further, the smirk never leaving his face. He found her embarrassed face cute. She was different from Renner, and he found her being Renner's complete opposite to be refreshing. My eyes were not wandering. Shut up. She dashed into attack, swinging her sword wildly as Arthur perfectly dodged her attacks. Lycaeus could not help but feel a bit saddened. Despite his teasing, she actually liked his company and he was a handsome fellow as well. Unfortunately, she would have to cut ties with him eventually. She could not deny that she was starting to like him more and more. Worst part about it, that desire seemed to grow the more she tried to rationalize why she shouldn't like him. I need to go to church, she thought. Perhaps it would be beneficial for her, go through a cleansing, and wash away these sinful thoughts of hers. This feels like a useless chapter, to be honest. It was supposed to be reactions from the nobles after the Ascension ceremony, but I felt like I needed to first showcase why Renner marrying Arthur was a problem for them, so I changed. It also doesn't help that I haven't slept in 36 hours. What are your thoughts on the chapters? Was it good, bad? Did anything feel forced? How were the interactions? Please tell me. 11 comments, 0 vote. The princes react. It was a new day. The sun shone high in the sky, and the skies were a clear blue with a gentle breeze wafting through the streets of the capital city of the Re-Estais kingdom. The street vendors, hawkers, and street salesmen seemed to be working with a renewed vigor, and the common folk, the housewives, the drunkards, and children walked with a slight pep in their step. Did you hear? Someone was able to take down multiple members of Eight Fingers. I heard it was the swordless swordsman. He killed 2 high-ranking members and captured 2 other. Such whispers and talk could be heard as everyone in the streets talked about it. The common folk were first hit with the news of the swordless swordsman. The man who saved Rantel from an undead horde had defeated and managed to kill 2 higher-ranking members of Eight Fingers and captured another 2. Such news brought shock and awe to the faces of the masses. The average individual knew very well just how much of scourge the Eight Fingers had been within the community. If your daughter goes missing, Eight Fingers probably took her. If your son is partaking in gang activities and drug, he's been corrupted by 8. If you are in debt that you cannot pay, Eight Fingers is why you can't pay. These were the known facts about the organization, and the people of the Re-Estais kingdom could do nothing about it, and worst of all, the very people that they thought would protect them from Eight Fingers did not, and the criminal organization seemed like an invincible presence that would forever exist to exploit and abuse them. However, with the news of 4 high-ranking members being taken down, a new sense of relief overcame the peasants. Now Eight Fingers didn't seem so invincible, and it seemed like it would only be a matter of time until that organization was dealt with. Arthur's reputation rose to new heights and masses only admired him further. Not only that, but the fact Princess Renner had worked together with him and was the one who planned everything made the peasants hold those 2 individuals in extremely. The peasants began to believe that their country was slowly moving towards a better and better future. Although there was never a female ruler in the kingdom's history, many began to think perhaps for the first time it was warranted, and the Golden Princess had prospects of being a great ruler. Did you hear the princess got engaged? Yes, I heard, but it's to some nobody called Baron Pendragon. Never even heard of him. You fool, don't you know? Baron Pendragon is the swordless swordsman. He ascended to nobility a week ago. News of Renner and Arthur's engagement hit the streets, and thousands of men seethed in jealousy. However, that didn't last long, as many had realized that this matching was the best-case scenario. The 2 had worked together to challenge Eight Fingers, and with their union, they would continue to change the kingdom for the better. This was good news. Of course there were naysayers and doubters, others who vehemently opposed this due to Arthur's unknown origins, however the majority cared not because to them the future of the Re-Estais kingdom was looking bright and that was cause for celebration. Of course, like in all places where there's people in power, when the peasants are happy, those in power are not. That cunning little Prince Nazzarick halted his words. Despite his slight displeasure, she was still his sister, and using such language to refer to her would not fly. Your Highness, perhaps you should sit down. Well, actually, this is good exercise for you, so continue. Marquis Raven informed the young prince who seemed to be pacing around the room. Nazzarick could only give him a glance before going back to his thoughts. Damn it. I hadn't expected her to aim for the throne, but I thought it was fine since I could have a possible ally against my brother. Nazzarick stated, her chances were low, sure she had a following and if she continued to rack up accomplishments she would have managed to enter the conversation of who gets the throne, her accomplishment with 8 fingers would have guaranteed her that. However, despite his initial panic at the news about her wanting the throne, there was still another obstacle for her, and that would be the inherent bias in the noble court. No woman has ever been queen. Even if she had gained favor of nobles, he was certain they would find a way to have a man on the throne rather than a woman. Nazzarick had hoped to be able to use this to have her as an ally with fake promises of helping her fight against the bias, but at the same time he hoped to separate her from Arthur as he was the main reason she was gaining accomplishments, and unfortunately that didn't happen, and now the two of them were engaged. It is not as if she can't be an ally now. Although our opportunity to have Arthur separated from Renner has closed, the princess can still be an ally. No, she can't. At this moment in time, Renner has 2 nobles backing her now, Viscount Ainz and Baron Pendragon, both with notable reputations, plus there's rumors that Viscount Ainz has been formed relationships with some low-ranking nobles. This means that at this moment my sister has formed her own 3rd faction. Nazzarick stated, he could only imagine how proud of herself Renner must be. He was initially happy about the decision to make Arthur a baron because it meant, at least for the most part, that all nobles could go after him to get his support, bribe him. If he had become a knight officially, all that would have been considered uncouth. After all, trying to bribe a knight who's already chosen a lord shows that you have no respect for their loyalty and for their lord. He could still be close to Renner and choose to support her, but they could always keep trying until they get him on their side. How with the engaged now recognized, if asking someone not to support his wife is just as uncouth as asking a knight to betray his lord, and thus Renner has now created a 3rd faction that will help her get the throne. Arthur has left our grasp, so what do we do? It's simple, Your Highness. You just need an accomplishment under your name. Marquis Raven suggested, and the prince halted his steps and looked at the Marquis. Not a bad idea, Marquis, what do you have in mind? It's nothing fancy, Your Highness. Unlike Renner who had Arthur, we can't accomplish a spectacle, however you do have sway when it comes to tax collections, perhaps a reduction of tax reduction. Raven informed, he was certain that the masses would appreciate a tax reduction, but he also knew that the nobles would not be happy about that. The suggestion was merely something he was throwing in the air, trying to bounce ideas with the prince. The nobles will not be happy about that, plus, the country is not quite fit for a tax reduction, but I like where your head is going, Marquis. I'm sure between the two of us we can think of something. Barbro could not help but feel that for the longest time now, he has only felt nothing but anger, and his anger issues started when that commoner arrived in the castle. Yes, commoner. The prince was unwilling to address Arthur by his proper title. Everyone in this castle are absolute buffoons. How could they allow a commoner to ascend to nobility? Don't they know what being a noble means? It's a birth not so easily given. Barbro spoke as he gripped a glass of white wine. There was slight intoxication on his cheeks, but he was otherwise still lucid. Your Highness, I understand your frustration, however, drinking is not the best way to go. We need to formulate strategies to deal with a possible 3rd faction. The ever-present Baloop stated, with Renner forming a 3rd faction and officially entering the succession war, things have become more dangerous, and the Marquis could not help but dread the idea, regardless of who gets the throne between the 2 princes. If it's not Renner, that person will be removed with violence. Renner, beside her, had a verifiable monster that Marquis Baloop believed could take the throne should he want. The fact that hasn't happened yet is purely because Arthur doesn't feel like it. This was a terrifying thought. Many times, he had thought to flee the kingdom, however this was his home. Running home would be cowardly, however at the same time, what can he do? It's a miracle that no one has yet to figure out that the prince sent a hit on Arthur, and should it be found out, he imagines Arthur will react accordingly. Shut up, Marquis, you've been useless this entire time, you just stand talking about nothing. Tell me something fucking useful for at least. Barbro said as he held in the urge to throw the glass in his hand. If he was drunk he would have thrown it. Very well, Your Majesty, I do have a suggestion. Then tell me. As you are aware, Arthur is more powerful than anyone else in the country. At present, no one can stop him, and consequently, Renner cannot be stopped since the two are now officially engaged. Volpe explained, there are many ways to prevent a faction from growing or being formed. Plus, Renner is a popular figure, and she's smart, so she knows how to utilize things well. Okay, what is your point? My point is rather than wait for the king to give you the crown. Why not ask for assistance to make the king give you the crown? Oh, I see what you're getting at, Marquis. Barbaro smiled as he heard the Marquis's question. However, Volpe could not. He hoped the emperor they're going to ask for might help them better deal with Arthur should he be an obstacle. Arthur had said that the Marquis Volpe not a mage when he arrived here, and now the Marquis hoped the rumored 6th tier mage might help the kingdom get rid of this monster, although he does wonder what price will he pay for that to happen. Thoughts on the chapter? Did you feel there was anything rushed or done poorly? Please tell me. Think of this as my apology for last chapter.